Thank you very much, Kumagai-san, for the introduction. I'd like to invite our panelists. Please come to the front. As introduced, my name is URATA. I am moderating this session on supply chain resilience. Today, the world we live in faces a wide range of serious risks that threaten to disrupt supply chains. These risks arise from various sources: geopolitical tensions, such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and a growing confrontation between the United States and China, as well as increasing frequency of natural disasters like floods driven by climate change. In addition, arbitrary tariff policies of the second Trump administration, which disregard international trade rules, have further increased uncertainty and instability in the global economic environment. Under these circumstances, governments around the world face a critical challenge of strengthening economic security by ensuring supply chains of essential goods that support people's daily lives. For companies, securing access to key materials and components vital to their production has become an urgent priority. In this context, building resilient supply chains, that is, systems that can withstand shocks and recover quickly, has become one of the most important policy and business objectives. Against this backdrop, this session, as I said earlier, focuses on how to enhance the resilience of supply chains. And to have a productive discussion, we first need to understand the current structure of supply chains, identify their key vulnerabilities, and then explore possible policy and corporate responses. We are very fortunate to have a distinguished group of panelists with us today to share their insights on this vital topic. Before inviting them to make their presentation, I'd like to briefly introduce each of them. From here next to me is Dr. Satoshi INOMATA. He is a chief senior researcher from the Institute of Developing Economies, IDE, JETRO, Japan. And then we have Dr. Yose Rizal DAMURI. He is an executive director of Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, in Jakarta, Indonesia. And then Dr. Cassey Lee is a senior fellow at the ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. And I'd like to tell you the kind of format or the time allocation of the presentation and discussion which follow presentation. I'd like to ask each panelist to spend no more than 10 minutes, and you can see the clock clicking in front of you. And then I give you a 2-minute warning, and then if time becomes 0, I just ask you to stop, okay? And then 3 presenters, 30 minutes, and then we have about 15 minutes for discussion among ourselves. And then I'd like to open up the floor for Q&A from the floor. Okay, with this, I'd like to first Dr. INOMATA, followed by Cassey Lee, Dr. Cassey Lee, and then Dr. Yose DAMURI, in that order. Okay? Dr. INOMATA, please.
My slide is coming up. Anyway, thank you, Urata-sensei, and thank you so much, RIETI-ANU, for inviting me to this very important workshop, symposium. Yeah, here we go. Okay, in the next 10 minutes, I will talk about some conceptual issues about supply chain resilience specific to geopolitical risks. This will be done by cross-referring to the classic deterrent theory in international relations by focusing on the strategic nature of economic security. You know, the conventional approach to supply chain resilience include something like diversification of suppliers and production bases, expansion of inventory, development of substitutes, and promotion of recycling technologies. Now, these measures can be effectively applied to certain types of supply chain risks, such as those caused by natural hazards or pandemic. However, when it comes to the geopolitical risks, they are not enough. We would need a bit more of strategic thinking. Why? This is because of the game-like nature of risk management that geopolitical relations entail. Namely, what we do to mitigate immediate risks shall influence the perception of opponents from whom the risk originate, and thereby changes the entire risk environment. You know, there is interaction between what we do and how they react, making the strategic thinking necessary. And this is exactly, we should refer to the classic strategy playbook. You know, in the field of classic military security framework, there are two contrasting approaches for deterrence. Deterrence by punishment and deterrence by denial. Now, the former refers to the credible demonstration of retaliatory capabilities to entirely offset the gains from preemptive attacks. Well, for example, the concept like mutually assured destruction in the 1960s is based on this idea. By contrast, the deterrence by denial assumes a kind of mechanism that reduces the effectiveness of hostile actions, and thereby discouraging opponent from taking such actions. In the military domain, air defense missile systems can be primary examples. Now, in the context of economic security, the former, the punitive deterrence, may correspond to seizing control of supply chain core competence, such as the production of advanced semiconductors or critical minerals, by suggesting the retaliation through economic statecraft utilizing these strategic assets. Now, in Japan, this is often discussed under the slogan of strategic indispensability. Now, as for the deterrence by denial, economic partnerships among like-minded countries, such as supply chain friend sharing, may serve for this purpose. For example, supply chain agreement under the IPEF or European Union's economic security strategies have a kind of systems that encourage member countries to share critical supplies within the group, or at least exchange information about supply capacities when allied countries are facing bottlenecks. Now, from the viewpoint of adversaries, this lowers their expectation on the effectiveness of hostile actions, such as the economic coercion through the export controls, and thereby reducing their willingness to launch such actions. Well, I know that this is a very crude analogy, but I believe it elucidates the strategic nature of economic security vis-a-vis geopolitical risks, which are distinctively different from the risk countermeasures against something like natural hazards or pandemics. Now, given this perspective, what should government do to enhance supply chain resilience through economic determinants? I can raise 3 issues specific to Japan. First, Japan lags behind major Western countries in cybersecurity. Well, of course, recently there has been a notable development, the introduction of security clearance systems, or the legislation of active cyber defense law. But the full implementation of these measures shall still require significant time and resources. Second, now we should urgently raise the risk awareness of small and medium-sized enterprises. Many Japanese SMEs have important technologies, and some of them are quite relevant for military capabilities. However, most of them are not sufficiently aware of how their niche technologies or products are linked to the national security, or where might be a critical loophole for information leakage. Now, this is a big problem. Now, finally, international cooperation for institutional development must be promoted. Increasing the number of countries that share the common regulatory frameworks will give wider opportunities for firms to diversify their business and supply chains, and therefore raising resilience. I'm wondering whether CPTPP can be a promising platform for this purpose. Now, very quickly, before I close, I want to introduce some supply chain risk indicators that I have recently developed myself. Now, the first one is pass-through frequency, PTF, which measures the supply chain exposure to geographic concentration risk. Based on OECD's intercountry impact table, it covers 76 economies over the horizon of 26 years, starting from 1995. Recently, the indicator has been integrated into the OECD database as official statistics. So you can actually freely download the data from their website. Now, the second indicator is based on farm-level data called fact set review. Now, the data set covers the supply chain of 42,000 firms globally, so it's a pretty comprehensive data. Well, I'm going to make a presentation on this new metric in the session of Economic Security Global Forum Weeks in the morning of December 16th. And it's going to be right before the RIETI Symposium, so it will be a full Economic Security Day, so please mark the date. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Inomata, for introducing very interesting, very important new data sets, as well as promotion of the forthcoming event by RIETI, and I guess, ID JETRO. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Cassey Lee to make his presentation.
First, allow me to thank RIETI and ANU for this kind invitation to talk about this topic. Let me be quick because we have a severe time constraint. When we try to analyze the issue of supply chain resilience in the context of geoeconomics or geopolitics, we have to consider a lot of issues a lot of issues that require a deep understanding of the complex structure or network, ranging from different kind of firms that are involved, different institutions, different layers of sort of like agents in the system, voters, household influencing economic policies, which then materializes as national policies. Now, that's something we have to bear in mind when we formulate this kind of policies. So in my presentation, I try to ask at least two questions. How vulnerable are supply chains to sort of what I call state-driven shocks, which are policies that we have seen under Trump 2.0, and what governments can do to enhance resilience, or what they've been trying to do, right? And my presentation focus primarily on Malaysia and with some comments on Singapore's recent experience. These are the model, since we don't have time, that I would try to frame the kind of approach when you try to look at this issue, which I mentioned earlier. Now, one way to look at the economic vulnerabilities to shocks is this nice diagram that appeared in a OECD working paper, which has 3 dimensions. You look at supply-product diversification, which has been mentioned a fair bit by the previous speaker and also the keynote speaker, and the supply and demand risks associated with it, and the economic importance of the sector that is involved. Now, when we look at Malaysia, for example, it's a very small and open economy. It has a very high trade ratio, although that ratio has been declining for the past 20 years. It's still high. In terms of its export concentration ratio, using, like, for example, Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, it has increased in recent years. It's highly dependent on E&E exports, especially the semiconductor industry. And even within the semiconductor industry, it's focused on particular segment of the value chain, assembly, testing, packaging, with some small legacy fabs, and also interest in emerging IC design. This industry is, in terms of the supply chain, is intertwined and concentrated in a few major countries that are directly impacted by geopolitical rivalries, right? This is Herfindahl-Hirschman Index ratio of Malaysia in compared to the other ASEAN. It's rising. It's still below the 0.2 threshold that OECD said that's quite critical. But then when you look carefully beyond the aggregated level, right? When you look at E&E, for example, this is the E&E share of total exports. It's about close to 37–38% today. Within that, semiconductor alone accounts for about 30% of that 38%. And within, if you go down narrow further, within the different category, you see the IC circuits account for almost 80% of the semiconductor exports. Right? There are some interesting developments regarding how much of the semiconductor industry export uses foreign imports. That has remained around 55% actually. In terms of exposure, I don't have the FDI stock for E&E, but this is the broad for the overall manufacturing. You can see US, it's important, and of course Singapore, because it's it's a country where a lot of regional companies are headquarters there, and Japan at 13.5%. Beyond the HHI index, I believe the HHI index is much higher for the E&E sector. You can see these top 4 countries alone, Singapore, US, and if you combine China and Hong Kong together, constitute a big chunk of the E&E market source. In terms of imports, this is where we talk about GVC. Imports, it's also very highly concentrated, at least a quarter from China, and Taiwan is also very significant, and of course Singapore and US. This is from the Complexity Observatory. This gives you a good idea of Malaysia's export is on the left, import is on the right. A lot of E&E, just the dark blue. This is trade with the US. So a significant chunk of our trade with the US is actually in this sector. And with China, a little bit more diversified, but in terms of imports, a high dependence on the GVC with China, right? Now, what are the policy response that we have seen? We can look at pre-Trump 2.0, right, the early stage. What Malaysia is undergoing is from a fairly ad hoc approach to a more, trying to formulate a more systematic strategy. In the pre-Trump tariff era, there is awareness of supply chain resilience issue. If you look at the new Industrial Master Plan 2030, there is 4 missions. One of the mission talks about safeguarding economic security by identifying strategies for supply chain resilience in some of the critical sectors, the kind of cooperation that are needed, the G2G, G2C, and something to work on the critical minerals policy. Malaysia also has a national semiconductor strategy that talks about strengthening foundation, moving to frontier and innovation at frontier. And it doesn't really address the resilient issue straight on, but some of the strategies within this semiconductor strategy is related to that. Value chain diversification in moving into other activities like IC design and new markets, and sort of fostering local players and local champions. Beyond that, what Malaysia has been trying to do is, at the broad level, hedging, trying to maintain a neutral stance in the US-China geopolitical rivalry as a way to enhance Malaysia's attractiveness for FDI in this sector. By strengthening ties with China, by engaging US, although this has been shaped a lot by tariffs and export control and constrained also by the Gaza war. And the countries continue to try and engage negotiations to reduce tariff and key sectors that has not been determined, that will be determined, like cocoa, palm oil, furniture. We have already seen automotive and aerospace. There is formation of National Geo-Economic Coordination Council to deal with this issue, and I think Rebecca will talk about some of the ASEAN Chat initiative during the Malaysia year as chairman. One of the strategy is, of course, engagement with key exporters, and this is quite interesting through company-specific investment. A major investor in Malaysia is Intel, and the American government has invested in Intel, and Intel has committed a huge amount of investment in the US. So company-level strategy within the larger country level is something important. And also greater enforcement in activities that affect US sanction, for example, transshipment activities and AI chip diversions is an issue. Beyond that, looking at market diversification, new bilateral trade agreement and economic partnership, and also to mitigate some of these effects, roll out financial support for smaller companies and SME, and a future national mineral policy. The business expectations, maybe we can talk a bit during Q&A. There's been a couple of surveys, especially the first half of this year. Decline in revenues, increase in costs, steady decline, steady or decline in investment. There's digitalization, innovation, diversification, and also requests for financial support. I end with this very interesting quote by Singapore Minister Desmond Lee. Economic resilience is not about withstanding just adversity, but also transforming through it and then thriving in this new environment. Looking at Singapore's experience, look at the new Singapore Economic Resilience Task Force is really interesting. there are three dimensions, three work streams. One is information sharing and sense making involving G and B. There's immediate support to address challenges faced our business and worker, the tripartite model involving business, government, and labor unions to go through this process. And importantly, long-term strategic planning to deal with some of the changes which will be more or less on a more permanent basis in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for very comprehensive discussion or description of Malaysian case. Very interesting. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Yose DAMURI to make his presentation on Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor URATA. Very good afternoon to you all. It's good to be back here in the RIETI-ANU forum. I remember I was in this forum, the symposiums 3 years ago, just right after the COVID pandemic. And then we've also already talked about the global fragmentations at that times. Fast forward today, 3 years after, we see there is no, it's even has accelerated further. And I think talking about supply chains and economic resilience really fits the current situations that we're having. My fellow panelists already described various important aspects, various issues related to the supply chain resilience. So right now, I'm going to talk more about the Indonesian case to look at what's the government of Indonesia approach toward economic resilience and supply chain resilience. So I'm going to raise 3 points in my talk today. I'm going to organize my talk into 3 parts. The first one is the context, trying to look at what happens in Indonesia. Indonesia, for example, has never been integrated well to the global economy or global supply chain. Its trade contribution is declining, and the integration in value chain is much lower than its neighbor, for example, Malaysia or Vietnam. Also, from the policy context and economic environment context, we can also see there is a shift in the global economic situation from trade war between the US and China starting in 2018, the pandemic, and also various conflict and tensions. From the policy side, Indonesia also has always had the obsessions, I can call it obsessions, toward economic independence. So, and to become more self-sufficient. So, in order to improve economic independence, this is also related to the approach, the strategies that Indonesia has taken for economic resilience. In addition to that, Indonesia also has aspirations to improve its industrial competitiveness and to pursue industrial deepening. The current situations, the global shift, the global economic shift also appears perceived by Indonesian governments as the chance for Indonesia to further strengthening the competitiveness and also to improve economic independence. So with that, we can also see that there is a big shift in the grand narrative in Indonesia about economic and supply chain resilience. This is the second part of my talk, to talk about the approach, the strategies that Indonesia has taken. In the past, when we're talking about economic resilience, when we're talking about supply chain resilience, it's about improving logistics and connectivity. But right now, the focus is on how to improve domestic production and strategic stockpiling. In order to do that, the role of state is expanded, has been expanded excessively, in my opinion, in the last 10 years, to lead investments and production activities through the state-owned enterprise or even direct interventions of the government. It has started since President Jokowi's term and become more obvious during the Prabowo's term started last year. There are three strategies, basically, that President Jokowi pursued in his 10-year term. The first one is downstreaming strategy to develop the whole value chain of minerals and commodities that Indonesia produce from end to end, from the raw materials toward the final products. Often, the strategy also includes the implementations, the application of export ban of raw materials. The second strategy is to increase domestic content of manufacturing productions by forcing industries to source the input from local suppliers before they can sell it domestically. So those two also complemented by improving business environment to attract investments. Those are strategies that have been taken under Jokowi's terms. In Prabowo's period, starting last year, it became even more obvious as several strategies has been taken to promote the resilience, especially in food and energy. In my presentations, I also include several slides to explain more details about each strategy, but I'm going to waste the time here if I explain each one by one. So I invite you to check the slides, and then perhaps we can also discuss about it during the discussion section. So, the third part of my talk today is how about the implications of those approach and strategies. Basically, we can see how it brings the effects towards the business sectors. The business sector is not really that happy with that kind of approach, especially because it is very inward-looking and try to promote self-sufficiency strategy. It's not really that appealing for them. It creates difficulties in sourcing inputs or to sell their products. A study from my institute, for example, in 2023, shows that the local content requirement policy is basically detrimental. It's not really benefiting the downstream industry, but also at the same time discourage upstream investment and upstream productions. So it's basically a lose-lose situation for the business sector. The effectiveness of this strategy to improve resilience also is still not clear. It does not really isolate or preserve Indonesia from price fluctuations of food, for example, or energy, or necessary inputs of production. So in the end, the effectiveness of the strategy that tend to be inward-looking is still very still unclear, and we still perhaps need to look at it deeper in several years ahead. But so before I wrap up my talk, I want to summarize my talk by taking some general ideas from Indonesia's strategies here. Also perhaps can be applied to other emerging and developing economies. There are differences on the objective and the focus and the approach towards resilience compared to the more developed economies. As you can see that, at least in the case of Indonesia, it can easily be manifested as inward-looking strategies towards self-sufficiency. My presentation is actually about the current strategies that Indonesia has taken and the implications toward that strategies. We can discuss about what to do about it during the discussions, and also we can discuss how the cooperations can also basically can be threatened, but also can also help improve the situations with Indonesia situations or other developing economy situations. Thank you very much for the times. Thank you. Happy to have a further discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank all the panelists to keep time, and we have, I guess, quite a good time, like half an hour for our discussion. But let me briefly, not summarize, but let me just say a few words about what I've learned from the presentations. First, this is what Matsuo-san said. We can look at the supply chain resilience from both kind of supply side and demand side. Think of an operation which produces, say, automobile cars. In order to produce cars, you need to procure materials, component parts. You have to maybe import some of them. And this is what I think he calls and I call kind of supply side resilience. In order to get supply of materials, components, and if that is disrupted, then this operation cannot be run, right? And then think about automobile producers. With finished products, you have to sell, and you export some. And then this is the kind of demand side. From the point of view of this company, there's a growing demand in foreign countries. And so this is a demand side kind of supply chain. And if the foreign countries, say, restrict imports, then of course that leads to a problem. Disruption of supply chains. So looking at the supply chains from that perspective, what I understand is that the Japan and Indonesia case mainly talked about supply side, supply chain resilience, whereas Cassey Lee, he talked about Malaysian case from both sides. And this is maybe how we can characterize different types of supply chain resilience, supply side resilience and demand side resilience. Having said this, one of the important, I think, message that we obtained is the diversification of supply chains to deal with disruption. And we didn't discuss this, so I'd like to ask the panelists the following question about international cooperation or regional cooperation, which I think Matsuo-san referred to in his speech. Basically, so far we have talked about this issue from domestic point of view, from country's point of view, but I'd like to know how we can use regional cooperation or international cooperation to deal with this supply chain disruption or supply chain vulnerability. This is the first question I'd like to ask each one of you, if you don't mind spending a few minutes to respond to my question.
Yeah. Basically, there's a structural risks that we are facing. And one of the biggest concerns of mine is the, can be referred to in terms of what is called a security dilemma in international relation theory. Basically, a security dilemma refers to the situation where, one country's attempts to raise security, own national security, conversely endangers that security. That's where the dilemma is. And basically, the fundamental cause of the dilemma lies in the, the structure of the game, where parties lack effective communication channels to engage in complicity for joint survival. Perhaps you know the story about the prisoner's dilemma in game theory. Yeah? So here, the GVC, or Global Production Network, has a role to play. GVC, surely, as I said before, it can be weaponized by means of economic statecraft. But also, it can serve as an extensive communication channel across national borders, right? So I believe myself that GVC is a kind of dual-use apparatus, the one for tactical instrument for deterrence, and the other for as a trust-building mechanism for regional security. Right? So, but of course, the firms do not do business for the sake of security, so it should be the government's interest to recognize that trust-building function of GVCs and establish relevant institutional architectures for its active use. And I'm believing that some organizations like ASEAN regional forums can serve for this purpose, because it has some track-to system. It's called the Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia-Pacific, CSCAP. So I think it's going to be a very, very viable fora for this purpose.
Okay. Thank you. There's a regional kind of cooperation mechanism already set in so that we can utilize this. Now, Cassey, could you say something about this regional cooperation?
Yeah, there are a lot of kind of like standard prescription, right? Including, really improve trade facilitation, reduce non-tariff barriers so that your companies are able to actually, and also cooperation in digital transformation, so that cross-border data flow, to basically ensure that an environment is improved to enable companies to be more agile. I think these are kind of standard solution. But I want to pick up something that INOMATA said. I think when countries begin to cooperate and they try to sort of like, they are cooperating also increase your dependence on your trusted partner. So you are basically like, take the classic example of the energy grid, right? If you want energy resilience by relying on another country, you are depending on the other country. You have to trust the other country. So that kind of trust level, I think, is really important as part of this cooperation. It goes beyond just economic, but the peace dividend in, let's say, in Southeast Asia is really important. In ISEAS, a few days ago, we were having this webinar on the impact of Trump tariff on Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. The economic simulation that came out of that shows that, oh yeah, Cambodia, they're doing quite well, not so bad. But then it said that the impact of the border conflict is huge. It's like many, many times the effect of tariff, And this will also define cooperation within ASEAN, who still have to deal today with the Myanmar issue moving forward. And then, and this year, we'll have a new member, Timor-Leste. I think Rebecca has a lot of things to say about that, but I think this is really, really important issue to look at, I think. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Importance of trust. Huh? Right. Okay. Yes.
I agree with Cassey. Trust could be very determining factors in order to have the economic operations work effectively for resilience. Another thing that I like to add also perhaps the common understanding. Like for examples, when we're talking about economic resilience or economic security, we do have different kind of perceptions on what kind of resilience and security that we need to pursue. In the case of Indonesia, as I already presented, resilience and security is interpreted as self-sufficiency, as inward-looking strategies. For other countries like Japan, you have different kind of understanding. So economic cooperations can also come up with common understanding on what kind of resilience and what kind of economic security that we need to pursue. And before we talk about the approach towards the resilience and security issues, and I believe ASEAN really need to do it. I don't know if Rebecca also mentioned it in your presentations or not later on about ASEAN. ASEAN needs to come up with a common understanding of economic security and economic resilience so that we can try to respond together more cohesively towards the current global dynamics. That's my talk on it.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we have one more question. Simply put, I mean, supply chain resilience is to promote self-sufficiency or so-called strategic autonomy and so on. If that is practiced, then that may mean a greater fragmentation of the world economy. I mean, if it is done by one country, then this country versus the rest of the world. If a country does this with other countries, this grouping versus the rest of the world, there'll be fragmentation. Is this what we are going to say as a result of pursuing policies to promote economic resiliency, supply chain resiliency? Is this acceptable? Is this okay? Or if not, what should we do about it? Let me first, this time, go reverse order.
Okay.
Yose
right.
first.
All right. Of course, it depends on against the understandings of what kind of resilience that we need to pursue, if we choose to have different understanding, different definitions, and also tend to be more inward-looking, or at least to become to set economic blocks, to set up economic blocks, then we're going to end up with fragmentations, economic fragmentation. And as we already look at in various studies, the cost of economic fragmentation is quite high to the global economy. The question is, are we ready to bear that cost? For having a different kind of economic fragmentations, several standards of global economy that can go up to 8% to 12% of the current global economy. Are we going to be happy to bear that cost? And if yes, then who should bear the cost? Somebody has to bear the cost, and which ones of the which economies that should bear the cost, and which part of the economy, either the middle class in one economy or the poorest in one economy that has to bear the cost. All of them has to be taken into considerations both at the economic the economic consideration as well as political consideration. Because otherwise, what happens in Indonesia last month, what happens in Nepal last month, can also take place in many other countries in the world. We're going to look at social discontent not only in developing economies or certain regions such as Arab Springs, but also in many other, in all regions of the world, because that can be it has to be taken more seriously.
Cassey?
Yeah, I agree with Yose that that's why when I look at the Singapore resilience strategy, it was quite compelling because it has that element of the tripartite worker, business, and political leadership to actually navigate through. I think there's a lot of simulation on fragmentation. It all shows it will cost us in terms of GDP, no doubt. But then a lot of, I think, leaders in Southeast Asia, I think Malaysia and also Singapore especially, has seemed to say that, well, this is the economies like to think of first best. Forget about first best. We're not going to get first best anymore. We are now in second or third, fourth best. Fragmented world. The issue now is how do you take advantage of it, right? Malaysia specifically said that, well, we want a neutral space, country plus one sort of strategy. This is where we want to sit, right? I think what's interesting in this current scenario is also the role of large multinationals. I'm really intrigued by this in terms of fragmentation. Semiconductor is a classic case. The American put export restrictions on American chip makers, like they can't sell to China. And then Jensen Huang talked to Trump, look, this is going to backfire on you because the China is going to go to become resilient and not buy from you. Trump reverses that ban. And a few months later, China said, Chinese companies are not allowed to buy American chips. So that tit-and-tat strategy environment, which companies play a big role, is beginning to feature now in some of the country strategies have to feature that. Malaysia's engagement signed a 10-year deal with ARM to secure the access to the blueprints to design chip was important if you want to develop that country. And who owns ARM? SoftBank, which has access to Trump. The next level of sanctions that under 323, the exemptions people talk about are company-level exemptions. Therefore, countries are now thinking, yeah, big multinationals now have agencies to determine the shape of country policies, right? Whether this is a permanent feature or it has always been like that historically, the role of large firm is important. But having said that, Yose's point, that also leaves space to think about SMEs, which actually are helpless. What kind of national policies should you also have to complement that big policy that focuses on large firms to alleviate this kind of potential social cohesion problem that you can have as an outcome of that? Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I think the pursuit of strategic autonomy or strategic indispensability does not necessarily lead to fragmentation of global economy. You see, the larger chances for diversification should involve the expansion of production network across the countries. So what I pointed out earlier is the excessive friendshoring that may risk the global decoupling. Yep. So there's a very delicate tipping point, which that we have to identify whether a certain level of friendshoring may lead to global decoupling, or it will still stay within the raising supply chain resiliency. And that also applies for the product diversification. We should stick to the small yard and high fence principle. But what is small yard? What is high fence? We cannot identify. We don't have any concrete definition on that. So for this, every intelligence, engineers, policymakers, economists should devote themselves into a clarification of where the border is. How do you define small yard and high fence, and so on. And continuous dialogue would be absolutely essential.
Okay, now we have about maybe 10 minutes for a open discussion. We should respond to some of the questions from the floor. We received quite a few interesting questions, so let me use my kind of discretion to select questions which may apply to multiple, panelists. Well, this is to Cassey and Yose about industrial policy to promote, I guess, supply chain resilience. And this question asks that the U.S., the Trump administration criticizes these countries with trade surplus against the U.S. Having excess supply or excess capacity in producing, these goods, which ended up leading to a trade surplus in their favor against the U.S. So I don't know whether this claim applies to you directly, but this is a kind of claim which is applied to China, of course. But if you have any views on this kind of criticism or complaints coming out from the United States, we'd like to welcome your views on this.
Yeah, you're right. It mostly applies to China, but I think related to this is, number one, the transshipment issue. That is related to that. The second one
Kimura-san talks about, okay, let me just...
I won't elaborate on that.
All right.
The second issue...
Kimura-san asked about the transshipment issue, and the, how it is determined and so on. So if you can say something about this, shipment issue, they'll be welcome too.
Most of the people we've talked to, actually, when they talk about the transshipment issue, is that it's about rules of origin, how well you can trace that. And it's too complicated. So we don't know, most of the people that we've talked to said that they don't know how it will actually be resolved, whether Trump will actually be able to effectively undertake a additional tariff. On what basis do you use to impose that argument, right? It could be, if you look at the solar panel case, in terms of countervailing duty and anti-dumping, the burden of proof will be put on the country and the companies. And people say, the American officials, they can't do it. They'll be overwhelmed by it. But if you look at the previous practice, it could be done by like in the solar panel, shifting the burden of proof to, this is what your case. If you can't prove it, we will put the tariff on you. So you have to work very hard to gather the evidence. So be prepared for that, I think. And companies are, in terms of your talk about excess production, multinational companies, including Chinese companies, they are merely reacting to incentive, market opportunities. If you look at the case of solar panel from Trump 1.0, Biden, and then Trump 2, there's a clear pattern of when there's American policy shift, the Chinese company begin to shift the operation to Asian countries. Not only one group of Asian countries, and then a second group of Asian countries throughout the different regime. So that's something that I think will continue to happen. That's why I also think that the shift to company-level sanction is actually a way to deal with this kind of, moving the Chinese productive capacity into Southeast Asia. But Southeast Asian countries are actually, they want that, They want that capacity because you're creating jobs in my country when you move it. So there is a kind of conflicting kind of like US policy and what Southeast Asian countries want.
Okay, you're saying yes.
Yeah, if I may address these questions also, first we have to realize that what the U.S. called as transshipment is actually different than what we have in minds about transshipments. It extends the term further, much beyond the current understanding. So, for many in Southeast Asian countries, I believe this kind of transshipment issues need to be tackled at the regional level rather than at country level. So ASEAN should come up with cohesive response using the regional platform and mechanism as well, such as, for example, ASEAN has this ASEAN single window. It can be accelerated, can be modified further in order to tackle the transshipment issues. Also, ASEAN needs to come up with, against the definitions of economic security, because the US put this transshipment and rules of origins related to the economic security issues. So in the end, it has to be tackled, it has to be dealt as a regional shocks rather than just to respond to the US unilaterally at the country level, at national level.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess one problem is that the US wants a bilateral negotiation. So what should we do about it? No. One more question. This is about, others to Inomata-san, but the other panelists can respond this too. I think public-private partnership is very important in, I guess, promoting or achieving supply chain resilience. And how is it in your country? How do you see the public-private, relationship or partnership to deal with supply chain resilience problem? Do you think, or according to this view, Japan is rather, in the case of Japan, this partnership is rather limited, but how do you see this?
Yes, I can just only talk about the case in Japan. I recently attended an interesting event called Economies Tokyo. And basically, the idea of this event is to promote the awareness of economic security, not only among policymakers, but private sector. So basically, many delegates from private sector joined the conference, and also parallelly within their venue, there is a booth promoting their own product related to economic security. So it's a kind of, it's a conference, but also it's an exhibition opportunity for private companies. And by doing this, they share the knowledge about economic security, and they share what kind of problem that they are facing between government and private sectors. And this kind of event effort has been increasingly visible in Japan. So, but one point, the one message running through the event is that now the economic security is a matter of risk management. It used to be like a matter of compliance, but now it's the private sector who decide on their own using the information provided by government. So this is a key message running through the event, and I would agree.
Okay, Yose, could you say something about the private-public partnership in Indonesia regarding supply chain resilience? I think you touched on this already in your presentation, but if you can elaborate on this.
Yes. As I mentioned in my presentations, state-driven economic activities is rising in Indonesia, and some of them are also try to deal with the supply chain resilience. But the thing is, private sector, it's mostly driven by the state, by the government, and private sectors remain to be in the periphery of the discussion, and as well as in the formations of the policy related to the supply chain resilience, while at the same time they also need to tackle the issues by themselves. So in the end, private sector is not really taken into account much in the formulations of the policy, but in the end, the private sector need to deal with the issues by themselves. At least that's what I observed so far.
Cassey?
Yeah. When I first read the economic literature, which has just appeared last 2024 on supply chain resilience, some of the models said that, information asymmetry, we need to bridge that. The lack of information in the private sector is an externality that actually, like a market failure, that government has to bridge. And I look at, this is very standard. This is very naive. And then I begin to kind of look at the Singapore policy, right? In which one of the policies actually, it is a different kind of private-public partnership, right? It's to make sense and share information, because information sits on so many different agencies. Big multinational, some have direct access to Trump, has a different kind of information and agency that the government don't even have, actually, right? So that kind of brings you to a different level of cooperation. So it's already happening. Right? This kind of cooperation is already happening. What needs to be institutionalized is this, I think, this information sharing and dissemination to actually happen. It's quite different from the case of Japan, right? Because in Malaysia and Singapore and other ASEAN countries, it's about multinationals operating in their country, which have accessing markets in China and US. Japan is Japanese companies, right? You're not talking about foreign companies in Japan. So it's a different context. But the problem remains kind of like the same, similar. Like if you see the case of SoftBank that we have seen, the discussion that SoftBank has had with Trump and how to influence some of the Trump policies. It's similar. It's also quite different, yeah, and different kind of public-private partnership, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, there are more questions, interesting questions, but because of a time constraint, we have to finish this session. And I'm not going to, summarize or all these very interesting and important discussions, because we have some time at the end, wrap-up session at the end. So I'll save my comments to that session. And please join me thanking all these panelists for wonderful discussions and presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much again.